to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt.
Welcome to another episode of Black and White and Thin Blue Lines. My name is Clarke Ahlers.
And I'm Serge Antonin.
We have a very special guest, Mr. Randolph Rice. Mr. Rice is the victim's advocate for a woman named Rachel Morin. Say her name, Rachel Morin. Say her name. Rachel Morin, on August 5th, 2023, was brutally murdered on the Ma and Pa Trail in Harford County, Maryland. Her alleged killer, or accused killer, was recently arrested. We're going to learn all about that case.
Yeah, I mean it's a crazy case, and how they ultimately get to this guy is even crazier. So let's start off with Rachel. This is a 37-year-old mother who
A mother of how many?
Mother of 5.
Wow.
So she's got 5 kids. The oldest is 18 now. I think the youngest is maybe 4 or 5 at this point. Mother of 5. She was, from everybody's accounts, and if you see a picture of Rachel, you understand why. She was a very athletic woman, which is one of the reasons why she ended up on that trail that day.
Right, it's only 6 p.m. at night. She goes for a walk, a fitness walk,
yeah,
and
that's
that's
right.
a wonderful trail for that. It was
Right.
designed
Absolutely.
for that.
And what's interesting about the trail is that her mother used to take the kids on the trail, Rachel included, when they were little after dinner. It was a normal activity for them to have dinner. They would walk over the trail, and as a family, they would walk the trail and we'd talk. Very religious family. Rachel's one of, at the time, 6 siblings, so she has 1 sister and 4 of the brothers.
Okay.
Our mother, Patty Morin, who's become sort of the face of this whole thing, is incredibly devoted to Rachel. They were very close, and by all accounts, just a loving mother. She worked in the cleaning industry. She had a business that she purchased, working in residential and commercial cleaning business before her death. And like you said, she goes out for her standard jog on August 5th, 2023. And at some point that evening, the boyfriend says, this is strange. She hasn't come home yet. Where is she? They call police. Police sort of start the ball rolling, but it's not until the next day when they go out and they start investigating the trail. And she is found the next day in a like a culvert or like a drainage ditch underneath the Bel Air underpass or overpass, and her body is there. We now know from charging documents that she was partially clothed. She had 10 to 15 head wounds.
Wow.
She was obviously raped because the suspect is charged with rape, sexually assaulted. We also know that she was attacked on the trail and dragged from the trail to this drainage ditch where they ultimately found her.
One of the reasons that I start out by saying say her name is the political idea. Of course, when people are victimized by law enforcement in the United States, often we hear the cry, say the name, say the name. In this case, the person who's been accused of this crime came to this country unlawfully. Why don't you talk about that?
Sure. So what they know so far, and as of a day ago, which may lead to more information, is the House Judiciary Committee has opened an investigation and
Jim Jordan is
Yep.
demanding that Mayorkas,
Alejandro Mayorkas.
thank you, that Mayorkas provide the House Judiciary Committee with the specific evidence of how many times this man supposedly was sent back from this country and why he's in this country.
So ICE has said that he was stopped at least 3 times at the border and sent back across the border, and then ultimately made it across the 4th time. So to give you a little bit of a timeline, there's a murder in El Salvador in January of 2023.
Okay.
A young woman. We know from testimony or statements by the state's attorney's office at the defendant's initial bail review, that it was a young woman he met in a bar. They were leaving the bar, and then unfortunately the court cut the state off and said that's too much information.
And when you're referring to the state's attorney's office, you're referring to the state's attorney's office for Harford County, Maryland.
That's right.
Where he's now charged with the murder of Ms. Morin.
That's right. So he is charged in Harford County. Allison Healy is the state's attorney there.
And she was telling the judge the background for bail.
That's right. She was trying to introduce evidence of a alleged crime in El Salvador in January of 2023. So the crime happens in January 2023. He's believed to have crossed the southern border in February of 23. He then, his first appearance, I guess you could say, where we can track him, is he is seen on a doorbell camera footage leaving a home in Los Angeles, California, south of downtown, a very I would say it's a very dangerous neighborhood by all accounts, from detectives and reporters who've all gone to try to dig up the story. But he breaks into a home in Los Angeles in March of 2023. He assaults a woman and her 9-year-old daughter. It's been said that he sexually assaulted them, but we don't know that. I've heard different versions of that. He then leaves that home. When he leaves that home, he leaves a red Michael Jordan baseball cap and a bottle cap. He then leaves the home and is seen on doorbell camera, and we only catch the right side of his face, a partial view of his face, okay? They take the DNA, they take the baseball cap and they analyze it, and they find that there's some DNA on the bottle cap and the baseball cap. And they put that into CODIS. Flash forward to August 5th, 2023 is the next time that he shows up, and that's where he's alleged to have grabbed and snatched Rachel from the Mon Trail. He then drags her into the woods, and she is killed. Obviously, if he's charged with rape, there's an easy conclusion that he raped her, and that's got to be some of the DNA that's on her body. Right after that investigation begins in Maryland, they start analyzing the DNA. They put it in CODIS, and they realize, oh wow, we have a match in California.
I remember reading that in the
And I remember seeing it on the news.
Right, and I remember being fascinated by the idea that 35, 40 years ago in this country, they'd have never matched a home invasion in Los Angeles
Absolutely.
to a murder on a trail in Harford County, a fairly rural area of Maryland.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, initially people thought it might be the boyfriend.
Yeah. So,
So
I
think
mean,
about
that was the
what
thank
Clarke's
goodness.
talking about years ago. They'd still be trying to pin it on the boyfriend.
Yeah, and the boyfriend was, I would bet, the initial suspect at the very
Mhm.
beginning of this
Because
thing.
I think he had a criminal record, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think he might have, and it was a fairly new relationship,
Yes,
and
yep.
there was some suspicion
But,
behind.
but
he
to
was
make
great.
it clear, the boyfriend
Yeah.
has been completely
Oh, absolutely.
exonerated.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with this.
That's right.
In
And-
fact, he acted honorably, calling the police
Mhm.
timely
Oh, yeah.
when she did not return.
Yes.
That's exactly
But
right.
years ago, before DNA.
No, you're right, and he sort of disappeared from the. You haven't really heard much from him. He spoke a little bit early on in the investigation, and he sort of faded away.
Mhm.
So that's the connection. But they have the DNA, they have this photo or this video, and they think, or we think at the time, oh, this is a slam dunk case. This guy's going to be caught in the matter of weeks. Well, that wasn't the case.
Yes.
No, it wasn't. And one of the things which is so interesting for our listeners is that you, Randolph, became a victim's advocate and worked closely with Patty, Rachel's mother. And why don't you tell the viewers, because really I think in so many ways, Patty and you are to be congratulated for bringing this case to the next step.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. So we had known Patty, and we'd known some of the other family members for a number of years. And a couple weeks after, this was August, August 5th, August 6th, so maybe within a week of that, we get a phone call from Michael, who's Rachel's brother, Michael Morin. And he says, did you see that? I was out of town, and he says, did you see that that case in Harford County? I said, yeah, and I said, that's a pretty unique name, and Morin,
Sure.
Morin. And I thought, is that related to you? And he says, yeah, that's my sister. And it killed me because I'd known them for such a long time. I didn't know Rachel. And he said, do you mind if we come in and sit down with you? And I said, sure. And Joe Murtha at the time sat down with us and one of my law partners, and they said, we don't know what to do. And we know that there's going to be a lot of questions. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty, both from the media, from how do we act with the media, how do we make this case stay alive, so to speak, and what's moving forward. And I got to tell you, when they first came in, and they had DNA and they had a photo, we thought, oh, this will be a couple weeks, and this, and we took it on as a pro bono case because we thought, this is a good case. This is a family that's really
help
great.
these poor people.
Yeah.
Right. I don't mean poor financially, I mean the situation they're in.
Right, the situation they were in, and they're so nice. And the couple of the brothers came in, Rebecca Morin came in. We all sat in the conference room and we sort of talked about what to do. And like I said, we thought, okay, well, we'll just be sort of guiding them, advising, and it turned into a lot more than just answering a few questions. It turned into a major media story.
And let me just tell the listeners, in Maryland and virtually every state now, when you're arrested and or convicted of certain crimes, you're required to give a DNA sample. And if you think about, for years, the FBI had and still does, have fingerprints, millions of fingerprints on file, and can typically match a fingerprint if the person's ever been in the military or ever had a criminal arrest record. They're now doing this with DNA. And so your hope obviously was that whoever would commit a crime like this, a brutal rape and murder, likely had a criminal past.
Right.
One of the weaknesses in our southern border strategy, which is really a non-strategy.
I was about to say, what strategy are you
Right.
talking about?
Well, we have an open border.
Yes.
And one of the real problems is that people who come from these other countries, El Salvador, for example, might have terrible criminal histories. We have no way of checking that at the border. So it's a fiction when ICE tells us.
They've been vetted.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
Complete
What does
fiction.
vetted mean?
Complete
Right.
fiction. So obviously, until there's a connection to the California hit and CODIS, I would think law enforcement is assuming, in fact, I remember years ago the FBI teaching me as a young police officer that when a crime is committed in a place like the Heritage Trail, the Mampa Heritage Trail, the killer likely walked to the crime and therefore probably lives within several miles, walking distance.
Okay.
So you would think, in other words, as I read this in the paper, I thought this case is likely going to be solved with,
Right.
with an arrest in Harford County of a Harford County resident shortly after the offense. So,
Right. No, and so that was our first strategy was let's target the neighborhoods around. And so we ran off of what we knew at the time, which was we have an Hispanic male, fairly young, and we got pretty
there
close.
was a witness that said he was Hispanic. Is that correct? Saw him
No,
walking, or how
they
they?
pulled that from the DNA.
Oh, wow.
And from the that's what the
Fantastic.
sheriff at least was saying, and they also pulled that from the image on the doorbell camera from California in March.
Right.
So the thought was, and knowing that neighborhood that he was in, and which is really an interesting story too, is that they wouldn't tell us where he was, and I'll get to the sort of one of the things that we did, but they wouldn't tell us where the crime scene was in California. But we knew it was in a very, very heavily populated Hispanic community, so we figured the probability of this man speaking Spanish was very high. So we started off with printing flyers in both English and Spanish, and just doing family canvases, and this is very early on in the investigation, doing family canvases with a Spanish-speaking individual from the Morin's church, actually.
Okay.
Went out with us, and we went around to all the little neighborhoods around the head of the trail thinking, okay, maybe he has a connection, he's got to have somebody knows him, let's start here with this. And that was, looking back on it, that was like our toes in the water, because compared to what we ended up doing, it was, obviously we thought it would be effective, but it didn't really lead to much. And then the next thing we did was we figured, let's try to hit as many people as possible with these images. So we put together what's called a digital campaign. And I don't know if you've ever been on a website where there's just pictures and very little text
Yes.
of an ad. And that's called a display ad. So we started using our knowledge of advertising as being lawyers, and let's use that towards this case. So we put together display ads with still shots from the home, the doorbell camera of the suspect, along with information about a reward. Now, that's another part of it, is that the reward started at $10,000, and that was from the Crime Stoppers and the Harford County Sheriff's Department. And we thought, if we're really going to get anybody to come forward, we need to
Turn it up a notch.
incentivize this. And people, money talks, right? Money makes people
Sure.
do things.
Absolutely.
So we started raising money. We put in $10,000. We had an anonymous woman from Harford County who wanted her name not to be involved with this, but just was concerned, had no connection to the Morin family, called us and said, hey, I want to put in $10,000 too.
I'll say a prayer for her. This is,
Yeah,
this is
right.
anonymous. Very nice.
So now it's up to $30,000. And then some of the family members did a podcast from a podcast based in Colorado, crime podcast. They called us up and said, you know what, we want to put in $5,000 as well. So we had this $35,000 reward that we thought was a healthy amount of money to incentivize somebody to come forward.
Absolutely.
So we started with the digital campaign in Spanish only, and we ran it on Spanish language channels only, meaning anything like a Telemundo, CNN, Spanish language CNN, Spanish language, any type of national things, and we ran them in California and we ran them in Harford County. Because we figured that somebody it's a weird distance to come.
Sure.
Somebody had to have helped him, with housing or
Sure.
food.
Well, why would he come here?
Right, why would he
Yeah,
come here? There's got to be a
absolutely.
connection.
Yep.
That's anybody that's ever Google Harford County Mon Paw Trail, you'll see it's off the beaten path.
Yes.
And it's so much off the beaten path that it's off the beaten path that you have to really know where it
Right,
is. So
yeah.
there needs to be some knowledge of the
Right.
local area. So we did the digital campaign. We ran that in California and Maryland, and then we thought, you know what? How do we get to maybe the people that aren't? We were worried that maybe there was people in the Hispanic community that weren't on the internet, and we may be missing out on those people.
Mm-hmm.
So, by the use of Google Images, we knew that across the street from the home in California, because the detectives wouldn't tell us where it was, there was a very unique ridge line of the houses across the street.
Ah.
And we knew the police precinct that the house was in. So we started by looking at Google Images of all the houses, and this is a very densely populated. If you look at the 77th district of the Los Angeles Police Department, it is densely populated. So we started to look at Google Images, and we found the house based on the ridge line of the houses across the street, and we confirmed it. So now we knew where the house was. I mean, we knew where the house was, and we have a friend who helped one of my law partners years ago with physical mail, U.S. mail. And we did some research, and we found something called EDDM, Every Door Direct Mail. This is a program that the U.S. Postal Service put into place, believe it or not, to find lost dogs. Now, what I found funny about this is that it took us probably 3 weeks to get this thing approved by the Postal Service. So if you had a lost dog, in 3 weeks your dog was gone, right? By the time the mailer got out. So the U.S. Postal Service will target a specific geographical area based on the parameters that you give them. And then so we use this EDDM system and program through the U.S. Postal Service, and we printed up 10,000 large, I think they were 8.5 by 11, very heavy stock flyers, reward flyers. One side was in English, one side was in Spanish. It had photographs of Rachel, it had contact information for the Harford County Sheriff's Department, and it had still shots of this man coming out of the home in California. We sent it to 10,000 homes, and I think it reached, this tells you how densely populated it is, I think it was 85,000+ people in that neighborhood around this house. We sent them there.
By the way, just let me interrupt and say, some of our listeners are police officers. They should be learning from this. You're giving, seriously, no, I'm being very serious, Randolph. You're giving us a strategy for investigation, which is unique, and thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. So we sent that, and we also took them and distributed them throughout Bel Air as well, but we thought California really was not getting the coverage that we were getting back here. We were very, very successful with keeping the story alive in Maryland, but we were not as successful at keeping it alive in Los Angeles with the television and radio stations there. So this was really, we wanted to put more of that information out there. The reward kept going on. We kept trying to promote it every chance we could. Anytime a reporter called, anytime a media outlet would call, we would immediately be available for them to come to our office, to provide a family member, to go on. We did countless news. I gotta say, News Nation was probably the most involved TV station, national TV, because they really almost sort of took this case to heart, and they sort of latched onto it.
Mm-hmm.
So every couple of months or every month or so, we would do a News Nation update with one of the primetime shows, which was great because it kept it out there. Ashley Banfield, Chris Cuomo, Dan Abrams, they were very, very invested in this story, which we really thank them for doing that.
And they have quite a following on their digital platforms as well.
Yes.
In other words, you reach much more than just the people that are watching the show.
That's right. And we had a little bit of trouble getting traction with the Fox News and the CNNs early on, but what we did find is that we could get more traction with the digital reporters, and the digital reporter stories would actually get more views than you probably would get on a primetime Fox News or CNN.
Which is interesting, because I would think the opposite.
Right, but they're getting a lot more views on those videos, and so we provided Patty and Rebecca and Michael Morin to be available to talk. And we were doing Inside Edition, we were doing anything, anybody that would call, podcast, anybody, we made it available for them to talk about Rachel, to talk about the case, to keep it alive, because if it died in the public's eye, the worry was it also may die with the law enforcement in terms of their efforts, right? Our last effort was we actually brought Patty Morin and we shot a 30-second television commercial, very high quality. It looked like an Apple ad with the white background.
Okay.
Patty was very emotional, pleading for her daughter, pleading for somebody to come forward with information about her daughter. And this was a little bit different because we could run that on social media, and we could run it very specific areas. So we picked Los Angeles, Harford County, and then knowing what we knew and the length of time, and I think we were maybe 8 months into the investigation and there'd been no really hits, we thought, okay, there's a real possibility this guy is from south of the border.
Mm-hmm.
So we ran the ads along every zip code in major areas, cities, anywhere there was a major city or even a city along the southern border between the United States and Mexico. We ran Facebook and Instagram ads
That's
with
so
these 30-second
smart.
commercials.
This guy, we know, well, I shouldn't say we know. ICE has said he came across in El Paso and also in New Mexico, so that's so clever.
Yeah, we were running the ads there with the hope that maybe somebody saw him come across. And then, let's see, June 15th, or June 14th, into the 15th, the family gets a phone call.
This is 2024.
This is 2024. The family gets a phone call from the Harford County Sheriff's Department,
Mm-hmm.
and they say, stay by your phone.
Okay.
We got some news for you. And they thought maybe they got a DNA hit or whatever it may be. And then I think maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, they got a phone call from the second phone call, and they said, we got him. We caught him. We caught him in a Tulsa bar, a Tulsa, Oklahoma bar, sitting at the bar, and we got him. And the relief and the joy that I could hear in the voices of the Morins was incredible because they now may not close this door, but have the peace of mind that he is not out there causing more trouble.
And move on to the next step in a sense.
Yeah, I move on to the next step,
Yeah.
which is where we are now on June 26, 2024. This past Friday was his initial bail review hearing in the Harford County District Court. He appeared in front of Judge Kerwin Miller via Zoom, and this was the first time that the Morins had really seen him. Even though it was by TV, they could see him face to face. Now, let me back up a little bit more because it took about 6 days. So he gets arrested in Tulsa on a Friday night, Saturday morning. They start the extradition process.
Now, what were the circumstances, if you know?
He was in a bar, and they got So I'll get to how they figured that out, and how we believe they figured it out. And they haven't made it official, but we have a good sense, and you'll understand why in a second.
Okay.
But he gets picked up in a bar. They arrest him. He's got a warrant because if you look, the warrant out of Maryland was issued 6/14/2024. So they grab him. I think initially they said they charged him with trespassing, maybe for their own purposes to hold him. And they start the process of an extradition hearing. He waives extradition, I think on the Monday or Tuesday after he was arrested. And ultimately he's returned to Maryland on the Thursday before his hearing. U.S. Customs put him on a plane along with detectives from Harford County, and they flew him back to Martin State Airport, where he was met by the Harford County Sheriff's Department, and they had, Baltimore County obviously is there because that's in Baltimore County. He's immediately put into a police car, and he is transported up to the Harford County Detention Center. The next day, he appears at a bail review hearing in front of Judge Kerwin Miller in the Harford County Detention Center.
Some of our listeners might look him up on Maryland Judiciary Case Search. I just want to make it clear. There's a preliminary hearing scheduled for July. It's my prediction it'll never happen. He'll be indicted before the preliminary hearing. He'll undoubtedly, in my opinion, be indicted for murder and rape.
Yep. So he faces in the district court, the initial charging were first and second degree murder, first and second degree rape, and first and second degree assault. And as you know, the rape first and murder first carry life, 40 on the murder 2, and I think it's 25. I'm drawing a blank on but it's it's a lot of time, obviously. So he's facing the potential ultimately of life without parole when the state files that notice. He's at the bail review. The state's attorney discusses a little bit about the El Salvador murder, but the public defender shuts them down. The public defender argues that he's a father of a 3-year-old daughter. He's got a mother and father that he takes care of, but as she said, this is merely academic hearing. We know what the judge is going to do, and the judge says, for fear of public safety and a flight risk, obviously flight risk being a big one, denies bail. And as you said Clarke, in the next week or so, I anticipate a grand jury will be convened, and they ultimately will indict him on whatever the state believes to present before the grand jury.
If for those of you who might go on the internet and kind of research this case, you'll find out that this man committed these crimes kind of distant in time, and so and obviously there's been a long period of time since Rachel Morin's murder in Maryland till his apprehension in Oklahoma. So one of the things that I'm quite certain law enforcement's doing is running other checks to see whether or not he's committed other crimes. It seems very unlikely that a person with this proclivity to be involved in repeated acts of terror and violence would suddenly, for some reason, just have pauses for 6-9 months.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we know from the Harford County Sheriff's Department that he is in a gang, an El Salvadorian gang, which I believe there's two main ones. And here's the irony of this whole thing. I'm sure you're probably laughing because you know this, is that over the past 2 years, the El Salvadorian president has been locking up every gang member because he wants to make his country safe. And the irony of it is that that gang member comes to Maryland and is now a suspect in Rachel's murder.
Yes.
So,
and it's not even a gang style killing. It's
no, that's
killing
right.
of an innocent mother.
Now, Clarke, you're right. There's a gap between March of 2023 and August of 2023. So Los Angeles to Maryland, I believe you're right, and I think there's other crimes in there. Then there's a 10-month plus gap between August of 23 and his arrest of June 15th, 2024, where I also think that there are a number of crimes that have been committed. The good news is now they've got his fingerprints. And now hopefully they can find if there were other incidents where he came in contact in a criminal activity based on maybe his fingerprints as well. A couple of the facts that we know. One is he's got family in Maryland, and this sort of leads me into how they find him.
Because one of the things that actually I found was a little bit reassuring is his family actually cooperated with law enforcement.
They did. So the best way to describe this and to sort of visualize this is look at you've ever seen a family tree before? The family tree goes up and then it branches back down.
Starts with Eve.
That's right. That's right. And it goes back down.
Right.
What the technology that they're able to use today is that they're able to, let's say your suspect's at the bottom of that tree. He's the root. He's the roots, right? And you want to figure out who he is. You're able to, the detectives and the law enforcement, the FBI are able to use genealogical forensics to go to a branch of that tree. Let's say a cousin, second cousin, third cousin, some distant removed, relative. And the fact is under our DNA, those family members all maintain somewhat of a similar DNA coding that allows them to say, well, we know that this person probably is a family member. We don't know what their direct relationship is, but there's a family member, and I'm assuming that family member is in CODIS. So they can then go to that family member and start working their way back up that tree and ultimately working it back down to where that's what they did here is they worked their way back down that tree till they found a family member that interestingly was in Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
May 20th, they get the hit. Now, what's interesting about May 20th, that's Rachel's birthday. And I think the family thinks that there was a little bit of a divine intervention from above that she gave the nod to say, here's the tip that's going to lead you to my suspected killer. They get this tip, and they start figuring out who they are, and they make contact with the family members. But interestingly enough, the police are probably a day to a week too late because he's fled already. This is May. I can't remember the exact date that they said that he left the house and headed to Tulsa, and we don't know where he stopped in between. But they go to this family member's house and they start to talk to them. They start to figure out if he's related or not, and they realize that he is, and they realize what his name is. Now that's the one piece of evidence that we needed. We had his DNA, we had his photo, they had a sketch. Remember, they had, at some point, I think it was February of 24, they came out with a sketch of the suspect. Ironically, he's wearing the red, right? We've all seen the red baseball Michael Jordan hat. On his captured photo, he's wearing a yellow Michael Jordan hat in one of the photos that they had of him. So he obviously has an affinity for Michael Jordan hats, right?
What's interesting, too, is the family had some of his clothing. And as I understand it, they cooperated with law enforcement, so law enforcement was also able to get probably perfect DNA.
Right.
And I think, at least I've read in one report, of course some of the reports you're reading on the internet are second,
Yeah, I
third
would
hand.
believe, yeah, there's so many things I've read in this case.
But
that
there
just
might
shock
be,
me.
they might have found Rachel's DNA associated with him.
They may have. I can't confirm or
Okay.
deny, but I do know that they now. I think the importance of the DNA at the house in Maryland at the family's home is that it's confirmed. It confirms
Absolutely.
their belief that this is our guy. Right
Yep.
now, how do we now find him because he's in the wind? And there's been rumors, and I've heard talk among people, but my understanding or belief is that they then went to technology to track him. Now, we all have a cell phone. Every time you turn your cell phone on or use your cell phone, it's immediately registering your location, your IP address, if you have Google Maps or
Yes.
Facebook. So there was a wait from what I can believe is that there's a waiting period to where they then are able to identify where he is. And I think that once he does something in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they're able to say to the FBI, who then contacts Tulsa police and says, we got it, we know where he is,
Yeah.
let's go grab him.
Okay.
So that's how they get to Tulsa, from my understanding, or from what I
Into
believe.
that bar.
Yeah, into that bar, sitting at the bar,
Yeah.
just having a beer.
You
With
know,
a phone.
Yeah, with a phone, right?
one of the things that, of course, lawyers get good and bad raps for things they do right and wrong. But one of the things that I really think is to the credit of Randolph Rice and to this firm is that there were an awful lot of hours put into pro bono efforts to bring somebody to justice, to simply help to help a family, help a victim. And in a perfect world, our government would be doing that. We're far from a perfect world right now. I personally feel like our government has let us down on the border. They're letting all sorts of people across the border that put our lives at risk. And here is a firm that stepped up and helped this family to try to bring closure. But at the same time, we've got this poor child in Houston, Texas.
That's right.
Was murdered very.
Jocelyn, I'm going to pronounce her name, Nagaldi. I think it's
a tough last name.
It is a tough last name, but she is found murdered in a drainage ditch in Houston, and the two suspects are tracked that are illegal immigrants.
We had
right?
the nursing student in Georgia graduating from nursing school and brutally murdered. And so, unfortunately, at least from my point of view, our government is not protecting us. Bad enough that we have Americans that commit crimes, but we're letting in all sorts of people that we don't know anything at all about their background.
And last week we had a 13-year-old raped in front of her friend in New York by an Ecuadorian that was immigrant. So it is a real problem. Now let me say this: there was I would say dwindling, but there was some hope that was slowly eroding as to whether the sheriff's department was able to solve this case. But I can say that they hit a home run. I mean, they stuck with it. I've yet to to say the name of the detective because we were in constant communication with the detective who was keeping us updated. But Sheriff Gaylor and that Harford County Sheriff's Department, they kept with it, and I get all the credit. They really do.
And I will say that, and I think Serge probably shares this point of view, that within local law enforcement in Maryland, the Harford County Sheriff's Department is well respected. Right, they have a very good reputation, unlike some agencies in Maryland, which may
Major
not.
city agencies.
And so, really, I tip of the hat to the detectives in this case. I didn't mean by my comments earlier to suggest that Harford County let us down. I think our national government's let us down.
Yeah. Well, and there's a county where they get 6-7 homicides a year, so
Right.
they're not. It's not. I wouldn't say they're not seasoned, but they certainly are not handling the volume that, say, a Baltimore County or maybe a Baltimore City may handle. And it has good and bad sides.
One good thing about agencies like that, though, is that they get a lot of seasoned officers from agencies like Baltimore City. I know quite a few who have gone to agencies like that, and they are an asset because of their experience with large volume.
Well, they had some great detectives, and a couple weeks ago, before they caught the guy, we went in with Patty, and they had the director of CID, and they had a bunch of the detectives, and Patty just wanted to ask them questions, and they said, we'll spend as much time as you want answering questions for you. Yeah, they really did a great job. So hats off to those guys, the detectives, Sheriff Gaylor. They stuck with it.
And hats off to you. In other words, I still believe that one of the things that government does is it it responds to the squeaky wheel. I'm just being serious.
We were squeaky.
Well, but that's my point, and that makes a difference. And I really think that one of the things that Serge and I tried to do with this podcast is teach others how to advocate for themselves about the criminal justice system. And this is a tremendous lesson, really, even for me. I wrote it down so I won't forget it. I never heard of this EDDM system.
Yeah.
But
I know such a thing.
I won't forget it. It'll go in my notes.
Well, we were trying to get creative, and we got creative with a bunch of different things, and and while look, at the end of the day, does it directly lead to this? No, but I think by keeping it, like you said, by keeping it at the forefront, by keeping it a topic that's important to the public and the media, I think it may put a little pressure on law enforcement to say, we need to step up and we need to solve this crime.
And hopefully put some pressure on our national government to revisit the southern border our issues there.
That's high hopes there, Clarke Ahlers.
Yeah.
Serge, one of the things I was going to ask Serge if you had anything you want to kind of wrap up with, but before I get to that, I just want to let our listeners to know throughout this podcast, and also right now you can see on our podcast, you can see the name, address of Randolph Rice and his firm, Rice, Mirth, and Pesaurus in Lutherville, Maryland. They're an outstanding firm, well known throughout the state of Maryland, and I'm privileged to have been asked to assist in a small way in some of their cases, and it's always a very enjoyable for me because I'm working with first-class lawyers when I'm asked to.
And I love to hear the
Thank
stories.
you.
I love to hear the stories. Clarke tells
I love the stories.
Tell the story better.
I mean, you can't ever the meetings last like 3 hours, but I love the stories.
Well,
Now, before we wrap up,
Yeah.
what is your next step, your firm's next step with the family?
Yeah, so we're continuing to keep this. We've done since the arrest. We've done national media. We continue to do that. As I was saying, Fox and Friends tomorrow morning.
Black and white with them lines today.
That's right. Lines
we're
today. Yeah. But there's a couple of goals. One is we want to make sure we keep Rachel's name in the public and remember Rachel for who she is. Patty's received a call from President Trump last week to wish his condolences. And I got to tell you, it was a 20-minute phone call, and it was all about Patty and the kids and Rachel. It was nothing political about that phone call.
Now, let me ask you this, and I know Clarke hates when I say that. Now, let me ask you this. Have they heard from Joe Biden?
We
President
have
Joe
not.
Biden.
There's no one from the Biden administration has reached out.
Jill, nobody?
And Mayorkas referred to this case in a very
And he's the
cold
Homeland
way.
Security
Well,
Director.
he referred to Rachel as an individual, that
Correct.
individual who was murdered.
Correct. And I remember first of all, I saw it when the interview was taking place, then I saw people commenting on it, and it was another of his greatest hits for being completely out of touch with the American people.
He's the Director of Homeland Security,
Correct.
for people who don't know.
Yeah.
And he's terrible at that, and he's also terrible at condolences.
Yeah. Well,
He's
I
just
tell
terrible.
you, literally before I walked in here, I got a phone call from the New York Post looking for a comment because apparently they lost 8 ISIS-trained terrorists that came across the border, and the story broke about 20 minutes ago.
And
now
they've lost tens of thousands of children. It's just unbelievable.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
it really
the horrible part.
And so, look,
Awful.
we need to. I've said this a million times. We need to stop. Just shut it down and reevaluate and figure out a different way to do this. But going back to the previous question, we want to make sure we keep Rachel's name alive. We want to make sure that other people that may be victims can come forward and feel safe to come forward if they were a victim of this man. Other people to sort of learn from this incident, make sure that they don't become a victim of somebody that attacks them on a trail or of an illegal immigrant. But also, we want to make sure that this issue is, the family wants to make sure that this doesn't happen again. There's not another Rachel Morin because of a preventable murder.
And you know what I would like? For people to become more respectful of the idea of becoming a naturalized citizen. Like, think about it. We have a process in this country.
If you came to this country and you did it the right way,
My dad and my granddad came to this country and did it the right way.
what is happening now devalues what you did. And here's an analogy. it's the same thing, and I don't mean to jump to a different topic, but it's the same thing about saying to people that went out and got loans for college, and the government, Joe Biden, wants to forgive it. Now, right? Now, what about the guy who's sitting at home going, wait a second, I took out a loan, I paid all my loans back, right? I did it the right way, and all of a sudden you want to give all these people who didn't do it the right way a free pass. It's the same thing for people who came here legally. They went through the right process, they paid their dues, they did it the right way. And they've got to be looking at that and saying, wait a second, why did I do it the right way?
But the danger is, though, that those people aren't going to go out and rape and kill people if they haven't been vetted.
That's right.
To me, this is just something we've got as a country. We've got to get a handle on it. I like your idea of just got to shut it down and figure out where we are.
We can have a sensible immigration policy.
Yes.
But right now, the floodgates, and I've said this on national television, we are hemorrhaging, and they are arguing about what colored Band-Aid to put on this problem, when in fact they should be using a tourniquet to shut this down.
Couldn't agree with you more. And so my final thought is this. We need Randolph Rice teaching at the Maryland Police Training Commission to tell police officers how to involve the public and how to get witnesses to come forward, because this process is better than anything I've ever seen any law enforcement do. Absolutely. So my tip of the hat to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, indeed.
Well, that concludes this episode of Black and White Thin Blue Lines. Thank you very much. We look forward to speaking to you in 2 weeks with another episode.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
But life is never easy. There's work to be done and obligations to be met, obligations to truth, to justice, and to liberty.
This podcast is the copyrighted property of Black and White and Thin Blue Lines Incorporated, a Maryland corporation. Any rebroadcast of the podcast without the written permission of the owner is prohibited. For more information, we invite you to visit the website blackandwhiteandthinbluelines.com. All of the words in the URL address use common spelling and are typed together with no spaces. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we welcome your remarks through email. The email addresses of the co-creators, Serge Antonin and Clarke Ahlers, may be found on the website.